Welcome, everyone. I am particularly excited about today's show and the opportunity to be with Katherine Woodward Thomas, who I've looked forward to meeting for actually many years. The topic is Happy Even After, Conscious Uncoupling. And it's a rich and layered topic. We've actually already gotten some emails with questions. It seemed to spark a lot of interest. And it's an area that touches absolutely every human being. I think, by the time you're at least 13 or 14, you have friendships, you have marriages, you have relationships that end. And I think as human beings, generally, we're not very good at knowing how to stay related when the forms of our relationships change. So I'm very excited to at least begin a conversation. Katherine has taken this and many dimensions of relationship very deep. So we'll get as much done as we can in an hour. And if you have questions, what's the call-in number? I will give you the call-in number in a moment. So first, I want to introduce Katherine. And she is, I've known about her actually for years from a mutual friend who absolutely adores her. And I have been engaged in the feminine power work. I took their course, and Katherine and Claire were amazing and are doing really innovative and important work for women in particular. And also her book, Calling in the One. She's a best-selling author, 7 Weeks to Attract the Love of Your Life, and has been on all the talk shows and magazine articles, and she's now in the midst of writing 2 books, which I don't even know how that works, besides all the other work that she's getting done and contributing to the world. So, and she had a deep, a personal transformation, spiritual transformation when she was 14, and continued and has been wholeheartedly devoted to the evolution of love in the world, and is absolutely manifesting that, and is a demonstration of a woman who is making a difference in the world and is fulfilling her highest destiny, which is to be congratulated. So I want to thank you for being here and say welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for such a sweet introduction. I really appreciate it, Patricia. I'm really excited to be here with you, too, and I just love what you're doing. So appreciate the contribution of it.
Thank you. So I'd love to first find out, so we had, Calling in the One, which has touched thousands and thousands of women. It's a bestseller and all the work. And then now Conscious Uncoupling, so kind of like what's your journey been to bring you here, and why is this important for you in your teaching?
Yeah, thank you. I definitely am more known for helping people get into relationships than getting out of them. And I had a lot of resistance, actually, to bringing forward the conscious uncoupling work because, it was a very tender thing for me. My husband and I were married for 10 years, and then we made a choice to part ways. And, the moment I started to bring that forward and share that with people, there was a ton of, assumptions they had about that and a lot of feelings that they had about it. And so I really, and in a way I couldn't quite relate to it because the separation that Mark and I had was so decent and good and wholesome and kind, and so the automatic assumption, like, oh, I'm so sorry, and that's terrible, and are you okay? And so I started to really think very deeply about this, because first of all, it was somewhat awkward to bring this forward to people because then they were doubting the Calling in the One process, which works time and time again, is an amazing process. It's a 7-step process that actually helps people to manifest a beautiful love in their life. And so it made me really step back and look at the choices I was making and kind of the larger picture that we're all inside of around the evolution of consciousness and culture and the evolution of relationships, and the fact that relationships have changed more really in the last 50 years than they have in the 5,000 years before, and how that's really impacting us and how it impacted me. And what I had just done to create such a conscious separation from my former husband now, who is still the father of my daughter, and still I see, several days a week because we're co-parenting and we're very, very good friends and supportive to each other. So it's more like our experience is more like an extended, expanded family than, a broken family. So I wasn't relating to any of those terms.
Right.
But so I looked, I did some research on kind of the happily ever after myth that we are all inside of, and how that's really impacting all of us, and this assumption that unless a relationship stays together for life, that it has failed, inside of the kind of standard of till death do us part. There's just this covert standard that we're holding ourselves and others accountable to. And so I started to, because I had such a different experience, I started to kind of research breakups and what was happening, and I kind of saw how primitive we all are inside of our assumptions about breaking up. And because we have these assumptions that it's a failure, how we haven't really developed the capacity to transform and transition our relationships in these healthy ways. And so, when people saw how Mark and I had done that, people said, they were coming to me and they were saying, well, can you help me with my breakup? And can you help my children? And, we want to do it the way that you've done it, because you seem to have relatively low trauma. You're all good friends. There's a lot of integrity and wholesomeness to the whole process. So I actually looked at it, and I saw, what we had done, and I saw that I could break it down into really 5 steps of what we had done to create that kind of a transition, and then started to teach it to other people, and it's actually very, very helpful and very successful for people. Mm-hmm. So I think there's this new paradigm that's emerging that actually needs to emerge, because, as much as we love that kind of happily ever after myth, the truth is that, studies indicate that most of us are going to have 2 or 3 at least significant relationships in our lifetime, which means that we're going to have at least 1 or 2 major breakups. Mm-hmm. And that we actually really need to learn how to do these in a way that promotes growth and evolution, and brings the best of us, to these experiences. I'll tell you that when I was going through this separation with Mark, in some ways I felt, even more loved than I had ever felt before, because he, when you're first going into a relationship, you have all these projections on each other, and you just assume you're going to get everything that you want, and it's when you kind of know that you're not going to, and you've kind of swallowed the bitter pill of just the day-to-day power struggles, or where you've bumped up against each other, or where you haven't been able to go back and mend those broken pieces inside, or whatever it is that you were hoping for, and then to still extend love and kindness and care that's in a very conscious and deliberate way, is actually a profound way to experience love that's very mature and very real. So, it's actually been a very beautiful process.
It's interesting that the idea of do no harm, that maybe that agreement being at the beginning of the commitment of finding the level of love for each other that you will commit to what is going to be best for love and for each other and for your child, and if that at some point turns out to be not to be together, that you would find your way through that without harming each other.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I think what you're talking about, Patricia, is kind of, it's really this line of departure that's happening in one of the major foundational shifts that's happening in relationship, where we're moving from these kind of traditional vows, till death do us part, right? Mm-hmm. These very solid, no matter what vows. and into vows that are actually more reflective of what's really happening for most of us, which is this impulse towards actualizing our full potentials as people.
Right.
And so, you know, when Mark and I got married, we never did a till death do us part vow. What we did was we came together and we said we're going to support each other to realize the fullest potentials that we're here to realize and make our greatest contributions. And so that had a lot to do with why we ended up choosing to separate, because at some point in the relationship there was a choice to be made. Do we begin to shut down paths that we're feeling called to take that would lead us apart from each other, or do we prioritize the security of the union? And in the past, for generations, the security of the union has been what's most important. And if we look back at where the happily ever after myth came from, it's about 300 years old. And I like to say, you know, that the lifespan when we created that myth was 35. And that doesn't mean that people died at 35. There are plenty of people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s that were around, but a lot of the children were dying is what really contributed to that very low number. So I think it's like half the population perished before the age of 16 300 years ago. So it's almost hard for us to imagine how blessed we are really when we start to talk about this. So in a world where the children are so vulnerable, it makes sense for people to prioritize stability, right? So to look at where these assumptions and values came from, because they came inside of a certain context. The context of our lives right now are very, very different. We kind of have handled that. So, you know, obviously some children perish before the age of 16, and I'm not sure what the number is, but it's certainly not up by 50%. It's in the Western world anyway, it's rather small. Right. So our priorities right now are, you know, the planet is needing all of us to begin to rise to our fullest potentials and evolution of culture towards greater level of goodness and wholesomeness. And, you know, I mean, we're in such profound transformation. And that, you know, shift that we're all like looking forward to and wanting to participate in has to be a shift in our own evolution and in a building of our own capacities for mature relationship, for integration, for development along all sorts of lines, you know, that are kind of across the board, holistic. And so that's actually now what we're needing relationship for. We're actually needing relationship to support that development. So that's going to always put us at a crossroad with our relationships. It's going to create a different climate for the decision of, you know, what constitutes success in a relationship versus what's a failure in relationship. I think when people are feeling like that there's a failure of love, it's because one or both partners were not, for whatever reason, and largely a reason probably missing development, we're not somehow up for maximizing the potential of that relationship. And that's very painful. It's a painful breakup. And I think we all have had those experiences. Somebody shut down, they ran their old story, that kind of set you up to play out their old patterns. They were unconscious. You know, they contracted because they were scared. Sabotaged the relationship, and we didn't maximize the potentials of that relationship. So that's, you know, that's one trauma. And then there's also the experience in an evolutionary context where we are living rich, full lives well into our 80s and 90s, and, you know, being productive citizens. My dear grandma just passed last year at the age of 101, and she was dancing heels at her birthday party, you know, her 100th birthday party.
That's awesome.
You know, she was really something.
Wow.
So we have a different context, and a lot of the structure of our world is, of course, you know, we're building on what has been, but it's the happily ever after myth, and it's the structures of even what it is to get divorced in the country, because, you know, even no-fault divorce is a very recent thing. So in order to even get divorced for, you know, hundreds of years, you had to prove that somebody was, bad and wrong and did terrible abusive things. So there was a right and there was a wrong, and somebody was victimized, and that was the only way you could actually get out of a marriage. And, in some parts of the world, you still can't get out of a marriage. It's interesting. I was at Malta, visiting Malta a couple of years ago.
I think it's interesting, the point that you're making, which is the cultural piece that we're locked into. I mean, some of the work that I do, I'm very busy with the cultural elements that, I think up until a certain point we were doing our individual work, sort of in full steam, without realizing, with our childhoods and what happened with our parents, and, there was a certain framework that we were looking at what was shaping us. And the fact that we swim in a culture, in different kinds of cultural expectation, it's huge. I mean, the more I penetrate into that, I see how completely infiltrated you are by these various cultures. The one that I feel like you're speaking to, like I know my mom and dad, who have both passed, but they were married for over 60 years.
Wow.
And isn't that amazing? And they only wanted to kill each other at the end, when she was, having dementia. It made him scared, because he had somebody who he couldn't rely on. So, but up until that point, I mean, they were, I would say, pretty happily married. They had made good choices, I think, at the beginning, and they lived inside of that particular paradigm, which is you stay together, period. It's not even a conversation, really. I mean, you don't really think about it. There are other cultural paradigms, too, where people have been very, what is it? It's just kind of, well, I'll just, I'm not feeling it, so now I've got to go. It's like I'm now attracted to somebody else, and, I'm going off in another direction, which is kind of the next one up. There was a lot of that going on as well, which has caused a lot of the divorce rate as well. So I think there's got to be another paradigm beyond that, where there is commitment, but like you're saying, committed to what? And that quality of knowing from, since we're not living completely in a Newtonian, scientific paradigm where we're completely separate objects that you can actually separate from, that we really are connected forever. It's not till death do you part. I mean, you're actually connected to the people you're connected to forever, whether you like it or not. And to live more in consistency with that, and that we may have to change roles, and there may be things that need to change, but from where? From what level of commitment to one another, and to what level of consciousness with one another, I think needs, is part of what you're saying, and needs to be addressed. Because the next one beyond what my parents did was just as, I think, just as not useful and extremely damaging. People running around and kind of just really only going, doesn't feel right to me, and I don't care how it affects my children or the people around me. So, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I love the intelligence of what you're saying. You've said so much right there. I'm kind of excited by a lot of what you said. And I just want to point out that, whenever women have risen to power in a culture and no longer need to stay married in order to, survive, the divorce rates have gone up. So the more that women come into a place of equality and partnership with men, we are, this is going to be the new culture. So great, let's engage these things. I think what you're talking about is moral development. And the interesting thing, right? And so you're saying, okay, my parents had these frameworks, and it was really an ethical framework. Like, this is how life is. These are our obligations to the community. These are our obligations to each other and to the children. And then we've gone kind of into the postmodern world, which is a more, relative morality. And, thank goodness for the postmodern world. There's so many gifts that have come of it, individuation and a certain coming into our own and learning, about, I keep wanting to use the spiral dynamics, lingo. But I think there's been obviously a lot of wonderful things, but the downside
Yeah.
of it is that
And sensitive to ourselves. We found out who we
well,
are and,
into
and
right.
become more sensitive, which is truly important.
Well, and
Yeah.
learning about interiority, which, we have to remember interiority is only, about 100 years old on the planet. Like, oh, I have a feeling, and what is that feeling? And, gee, I have a separate self, and what do I need? Like, all of developmental.
I don't even know if it's 100 years. If you watch Mad Men, you have to wonder if they have any sense of interiority at all. That was only like 50 years ago.
Oh, Jim, I love you. Oh, Maddie, I love you too.
It's
Yes,
like
Maddie,
so weird. Yeah.
I mean, this lots happened in the last, 67 years. We're really on the fast track here. So all of this development is happening, but I think, we've gone a little astray as we're a little preoccupied with our own selves, and we've kind of in our rebellion of, all of that, taking back our own authority, we've become, morality has become relative.
Yeah.
So then it becomes, I'm the king or the queen of the universe, and whatever I want is what I want. And so we've almost, gone backwards from a moral perspective developmentally. We've kind of, so I think that's what you're talking to and speaking to. And actually, in the conscious uncoupling process that I've developed, I do have a place where I put in, because obviously breakups are a major catalyst for change and development that need to really be efforted in that direction. And one of the lines of development that I'm talking about is moral development, because we're pretty sophisticated and savvy about psychological development. We can look at our breakups and as we're assessing, now I need better boundaries. I need to, stop self-abandoning so much, or we might even say spiritual development. I need to have more faith. I need to have more trust in life. I need to take more risks. But we're not really up to the moral development conversation. Like, wow, I really get that there's karma. And when you behave that way, that there's like a pinch in the universe and it comes back to you, and your children suffer and you're generating suffering around you. And when you're selfish that way, there's a cost. And how does that land? And so we have to actually look at all of these things, because what you're talking about is where we're all going. And so we need to be able to harness the lessons and the opportunities for growth and development that are inherent to these partings. And that's what's going to allow us to show up in these much more mature ways that allow us to do exactly, the picture that you're painting.
Yeah, because I think, it's interesting if you just like where someone is and where they've come together, what joined them, what were they organized around, what was the relationship organized around, what is the breakup organized around, and then what would the next level of relatedness be organized around, what kind of commitment, what you focused on, what are the values, so that you have integrity in it, depending on where you are. Because when it's only, like you're saying, based on your personal, like on the Maslow's hierarchy, when it's based on, belonging or needs, like your self-esteem needs, like the being seen as a good person or being desirable, et cetera, it has certain limitations no matter what.
So we really are in uncharted territory. And one of the things I'm aware of is that we don't actually yet have the development to part in these very conscious ways. And as I've been researching it, it's kind of startling to see the gap that's really present, even in a lot of the, the books that are written about it. And so we'll make these kinds of, breakup mistakes, as I refer to them. The first one being that will kind of encourage us people to, devalue their former partner, for instance, or devalue the relationship.
Push them away. Yeah, of course.
Right? And Helen Fisher, who's an anthropologist, wonderful anthropologist, has done a lot of research on breaking up. She talks about that as a kind of an evolutionary stage of development that was, to help people to separate. It was that kind of knee-jerk soulmate to soul hate, as I like to call it.
It's good.
Action to just kind of, devalue the connection. But there's a very big cost to it, and you don't harvest the growth that's really available. And I think that, most of us are so wrapped up, the pain can be so excruciating, and the trauma is very big in a breakup. I mean, the trauma can be so severe. There's different levels of trauma that I actually map out for people. And I liken it to like a car accident. Nobody likes to have a car accident, but car accidents happen. And, breaking your heart is like breaking your leg, and you have to set it right, and you have to go into, some kind of tending to it and make sure you're well. But there's 3 different levels of trauma that I say. It's like a fender bender, which is kind of the breakup where you've been dating for a while, and there's been a lot of possibility or a lot of hope, but, maybe it never took, or a former partner came back in, or for whatever reasons different decisions were made. But even still, that's a big disappointment and can be kind of a little bit shattering. And then you have kind of a normal breakup, which I think is, there's power struggles and you can't quite resolve things, and you're coming back and forth, and maybe you stay in there for a long time, maybe you go to couples therapy, you try, and then eventually you break up. But you kind of saw it coming. You've been trying to avoid it. That's even greater level of trauma. And then there's, of course, the shatterings. And those shatterings are like, every bone in your body is broken and you're just lying there in traction. And that tends to be when somebody has behaved in a very, immoral way. There's been betrayal. There's been something, that you didn't see coming. Right. And it's kind of, shocking and traumatic. But I think what's important, so those traumas have to be dealt with, and you really do have a lot of, in those states, a lot of PTSD symptoms, and a lot of people, what will happen is that without a map on how to navigate that trauma, they'll move into prolonged grief. And I'm really, as I'm researching this, Patricia, I'm just finding out how many people are walking around with severe prolonged grief. I think they're going to include this in the diagnostic manual for therapists, because it's not actually in there right now, this prolonged grief disorder, but I'm seeing it as the root of so much that's going on for people. The contraction, the decisions that they're making to never really open their heart again. There's really quite a bit at stake in navigating a breakup well, and the more I get into it, the more passionate I'm becoming about it.
Can I ask, when you're guiding people, it's like you and your husband had a mutual, so there was mutuality in coming to the decision, it sounds like. It wasn't the last kind of car accident that you just spoke of. When you're wanting to be in a relationship and you get hit with, your husband just was screwing around with your best friend, or, something that's just knocks you out of the park. And
right.
They're leaving, and your whole world is coming apart. Do you have like certain things? Are there some things that you can say? I mean, obviously, it's a very big topic, but because that's different. That really is different than
it is
mutuality.
It is different, and I will say, there's always somebody that wants it more than the other person. I think.
That's true.
I mean, it could have actually been a lot more traumatic with my husband and I. And, years ago, he's a very private person, so years ago he asked me to not talk about the details of our relationships. I've never done that, other than in the Calling in the One book, I talk about some things. But, so I'm very tender about that, because anything that I say, is always going to be colored from my own perspective. So I haven't really gone into the details of how that went down between us. I will say that it could have definitely been a much more traumatic experience, except that we were doing this process with each other, where we're each really taking personal responsibility. We created a lot of containment. We had an ethic of kindness. We had certain principles that we were working inside of in how we were communicating with each other that created the opportunity for it to go down in a very conscious, caring way that left everybody pretty whole, healthy, and complete. And our family intact, just expanded and different.
Yeah.
So that
he was willing to do that. I mean, that was mutuality.
He was willing to do that.
which
There,
is,
there
yeah,
was, and a lot of that's not going to happen.
that's huge.
With a large
Yeah.
population. And so what you're talking about, this ability to be in communication kind of in the ethers, so I call it
Yeah, what do you
actually,
do when the other person goes, they're just
yeah.
gone and you're
Oh,
left
and
with the car wreck?
exactly. Well, so there's certain premises that we're working inside of,
Okay.
and just in terms of that, like throughout the course, throughout the process, I'm creating this what I call a soul to soul communication, where you
Hmm.
can actually work with someone not physically. They don't have
Yeah,
to.
totally. I believe in that. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
access to each other.
Yeah.
We really do. You were saying it
Even
before.
if they won't talk to you, right?
Yeah, no, but you can't really cut people off. I mean, my favorite story about
That's
that
great.
is I had a boyfriend in high school, all through high school. We were very in love, like a teenager. Like teenagers can fall in love. We were planning
Uh-huh.
life together. I think we bought, I think we bought a living room set that we were hiding in his garage or something. Funny, but it was really silly. But we were
Yeah.
really in love. And then we had some kind of trauma, and we broke up, and he married someone else very quickly, which
Wow.
severed the connection. And I was shattered. I mean, deeply traumatized. I gained 50 pounds. That's how traumatized
Oh
I
my
was, just
God.
beside myself. And I ended up dreaming about him for 20 years. And, just
Mm.
incomplete, just, this longing for him. And, and 20 years later, 20 years in, and it was actually part of my calling in the one process, I decided I was going to get married. And I looked at what I call process old agreements, and I saw that I had this agreement that I'd made with him where we were having so many struggles, and I had promised him that when I was in my 60s, I would come find him again, and then we would get married because we made our choices in life. It's a very 17-year-old thing to
Yeah.
say, right? But I realized that there was in the background, in this prolonged grief, that I was like, part of me was still living that out, and so I wasn't partnering with anyone. So he was still married, and he had 3 children. I didn't want to call him and have that conversation. So I brought him into my meditation. It was this soul to soul meditation. I had this conversation with him. This is what I'm teaching people to do. One of the techniques in the course, and we completed that in just this soul to soul meditation. But the thing that I wanted to share with you is that several years later, then I was separated from Mark, and somebody had connected the two of us via email at one point, and his
Uh-huh.
name is Frank, my high school boyfriend. So someone had connected us via email, and we had this very 5-minute conversation. It was very impassioned. We apologized. Maybe it was like 20 minutes probably. And it was a lot of heat though, and he was still married. So I just decided to not pursue it. And we left it there. It was a beautiful, 20-minute amends conversation. I'm
Yeah.
sorry I hurt you. I didn't mean to sever from you. Are you happy? Are you well? That kind of thing. So a year later, out of the blue, I just one night on a whim, Frank, how's Frank doing? I just want to write Frank and tell him, if you ever need a friend, I'm here. I didn't want to come into your life. I don't want to disrupt your life, but I just want you to know I love you and I'm here for you. As I hit the send button, this is 30 years after we broke up. As I hit the send button, I realized, Frank is getting a divorce. And an hour
You
later,
felt it.
he
Yeah.
wrote me back. He said, I cannot leave me tonight. My wife, over dinner, just told me she wants a
Hmm.
divorce. So that's how connected we
Yeah.
are 30
Yeah.
years later.
Well,
But
that's what we spoke of. It's not, I mean, we really are. The truth is, we live in this non-local reality. I mean, we are connected forever. We're always talking to each other. I love that you have a soul to soul process within this because, I mean, I do it really consciously because I can't help it. I mean, I'm always feeling different things and stuff's happening, and there's this web of influence, which is part of what I've been teaching. But that is magnificent. Yeah. So, I mean, the fact that we have any idea that we can just have car crashes with each other and leave the scene of the crime,
Right.
a hit and run, doesn't really exist.
Right. Well, here,
I
we talk a
love, I
lot
mean,
about
it's,
oneness, so it's getting present to what that actually
yeah,
means and how connected we all are. The
yeah,
relationship that we
beautiful.
have with that person, and also the ripple effect of all of the relationships that are impacted by that union. And so, you're talking about we were talking before about moral development, and I think moral development has so much to do with kind of awakening to an authentic care about our impact on others. That's really what it is. And so, we used to have a big
and from moral, but I found that when people have that as an idea, like they're telling themselves they should care, they have like a conversation about it. I find that the more you can do those kind of processes, where I did some of the Hellinger work too at one point, where you do a constellation thing and you actually see that these connections exist out of time, just like your connection to that guy. It's out of time. It doesn't matter that it's 30 years later. I mean, it's irrelevant. It's the connections are what they actually are. And so to learn to feel into that, to go into the state of consciousness and to start to open up so that you actually feel the reality of the fact that the connections are always there.
Yeah.
Then it's easier to want to, deal with things, I think, from a more moral place across the board, because it's just like, duh. I mean, you can't see it any other way.
Well, and I think it's actually our leading edge, truthfully, in terms of, so many of us are peace workers and light workers in the world, and we really care. And I think it really is going to come down to us growing ourselves, which kind of goes back to let me just go back to your other question, which is what to do with all these very big feelings, because there are very primitive feelings that come up.
Oh yeah.
In a breakup, hatred, rage, desire to punish and revenge, like all those of us who are conscious
and feeling invalidated, feeling like you've just been turned into nothing. I mean, nothing.
Yes, I mean, and so by that person, by the culture, because the culture covertly devalues people who are single, too. There's this whole like cultural, now you're part of the loser club again, and there's this cultural assumption, what's wrong with you? You can't make a partnership work. It's a failure. See, all these playing of all these kind of covert assumptions, which again go back to that happily, ever after myth of what constitutes success in relationship. But then the other person is probably, doing that primitive thing of devaluing the relationship, making you wrong. That's the second mistake I identify, is blaming the other person and getting all of our attention on what that other person did wrong. So of course you're talking now what it's like to be the recipient of that, and kind of the shock and the trauma of having gone from being, the Radha to your Krishna, to suddenly I'm, in the garbage dump and I'm nothing, and you're like on to someone else new. I mean, it's really quite a shock and a trauma. It's a loss of identity and the very foundational, like, organizing principle of your life. So what's really possible? I mean, the thing is that I think that people have been so in reaction to the trauma of a breakup that we really don't realize. We're not recognizing that we've just been handed like this golden opportunity for a whole new life of freedom and the possibility of like unprecedented happiness and fulfillment in our lives across the board, from how we're going to navigate this breakup. Because any breakup, so the first step in a conscious uncoupling process is going to be how to harness those big emotions and use them as a catalyst for change. I always think of, anger is really at its very essence the energy of change. It's a huge energy. And these patterns that have been so ingrained in our own lives, but also, they're in our lineage, they're in our culture, we're steeped in them. Like the thing about, for women, I've disappeared myself, I've martyred myself, I've self-abandoned for years, and now you're going to, just choose someone else over me and not, take care of me. So there's all the ways that we've had that are kind of collective, where we're chronically overgiving or self-abandoning in order to source safety, with kind of covert agendas. If I love you, then then you won't leave me, kind of, all of those kinds of things that are so much bigger than even our own individual lives. They're our own issues, but they're women's issues. They're what needs to be evolved across the board. So, to be able to, you actually need that level of ferocity that's inherent in rage to be able to move something forward that's so fixed in our consciousness that we have so many patterns around. So I teach this technique about how to begin to harness that energy for your own transformation. So you're in a crucible. It is really great because that's what I feel that the energy is really there for. That's my philosophy on why we feel so much energy. But I liken anger like to sexuality, because sexuality is like the most beautiful energy in the world. It is life force itself. And yet, if you don't harness sexuality properly, you get rape, you get sexual abuse, you get deep trauma, you get, all sorts of horrible, horrible things, in same energy, but different ways it's being used. So we want to harness that energy. And where we're ultimately going is to begin to reflect upon what just happened in the relationship and in the dynamics from a place of profound self-responsibility, meaning that, let's just assume that your partner has behaved, completely inappropriately, maybe immorally, done horrible things, revealed terrible things about their own character, that you have been very victimized. But unless you look at your own way of colluding in that dynamic, you will probably repeat it. Either you'll repeat it or you'll have to shut down to protect yourself and build a wall against ever having that level of intimacy and union again. So you have to evolve and you have to grow, and that's where these different lines of development come in that we were talking about. So it's turning your attention away from what was done to you to how you yourself colluded, and very often it's covert. It's, I didn't trust my knowing. I was overgiving as a way to try and get someone to love me. I was skipping over my own feelings and needs. I was self-abandoning to create peace in the relationship. And so, his or her abandonment of me just mirrored my own abandonment of me. It's like really getting very, very clear so that you know how to grow yourself and where you're using the energy of change to actually move yourself. The third week of the process is what I call healing your source fracture. It's actually going back, it's breaking the pattern and healing your heart. So it's instead of breaking your heart, you're breaking the pattern. The ways that we're making meaning of the breakup will reveal the very kind of core initial heartbreak. And it's kind of what I call like the original break in your leg. It's that it's going back to what was happening when you were very young, and in the dynamics in your home or the incident that happened. Maybe you had a parent who passed away. Maybe you had a parent who abandoned you, or a parent who was over time very inconsistent, very abusive, very negligent, or something. And what that meaning was that you internalized about who you are when it comes to love and your own value and your worthiness to be loved, who you are in relationship to others. So it's a belief about others, but it's not like an abstraction like others are selfish. It's more like others don't really care about my feelings. They care about their own, but they don't care about mine. So the relational belief that you have about others, the relational belief that you have about life, on a very primal level, not our higher developed consciousness, which is life is good and we're all one. No, it's like I am deeply alone in an indifferent universe that punishes me for any way I misstep. Because that's like the 5-year-old. That was the message, and very often we'll project onto the universe kind of an idealized version of our parents and whatever our, they were God to us when we were 3, 5, 7, 9.
Right.
So we will have these automatic assumptions, and we call that in the conscious uncoupling work your source fracture. And we start to really kind of deconstruct and unpack that. And a lot of people will believe that that's true, and they'll take the breakup as evidence, see as further evidence that this is true, because they're not understanding how they're actually co-creating that dynamic to show up over and over again, and even setting people up to kind of replay parts of that play out again. Right. So the opportunity for this unprecedented liberation from that story is right here in this pain, in this breakup. unlike any other opportunity. All of us are doing kind of our slow and steady growth, and we want to be happier, and we want to stop feeling anxious, and we want to have more. But when you're in a breakup and you just lost that identity, and you're so disorganized in who you are as a self, in what the possibilities of love are for you and what the future holds for you, you just lost a future. You're not in a heart space yet to create a new one. You still want the old future that you were now grieving.
Working on, yeah.
And also it can be a shattering in terms of your worldview, right? Because most of us have these kind of worldviews, like if I'm a good person, then only good things will happen to me, or I'll be loved, I'll be safe. And it's actually deeply disorienting and confusing. It's what we call a schema fracture in the psychological world. I'm a therapist, so I like some of this language. But it actually fractures your way of orienting to life. So the opportunity of that is unprecedented. And I'm beginning to see that, the opportunity of a breakup is almost like a near-death experience. And we kind of get, people have near-death experiences, and suddenly they're like, there was life before and then life after. They're a different person after. And they're enhanced.
That's good. I like that. Yeah, it is a near-death experience.
It is.
Fabulous.
It really is. Yeah.
Do you find that in this work that if the other partner is willing to do it, sometimes they find their way through together? Because a lot of this is what comes up in relationship. Not just in the breakup, but sometimes those patterns and the pain that gets inflicted. If partners are really willing to take responsibility, they can actually grow through it and possibly re-find each other.
I think that that's what happened with Mark and I, but you have to remember too that you're separating. So I really encourage people to do certainly the first 3 weeks on their own, and then to set up time where they might want to share in terms of making amends to each other. But I think we're empowering people also to move into an autonomous space. That hope that this is going to somehow work out is hard to let go of. Okay. And so I don't want to confuse people. So right now we're just empowering and what I say about that is you want these old dynamics to fall by the wayside. So go through the whole process empowering the choice that's been made to part and allow that old relationship to die. And it might be that at the end of that process, you've cleared so much of the karma. And I actually teach people an exercise, which I can share with you in a moment, about how to really start to communicate with people, because it's another area where we haven't developed skills yet. But you might choose, and then you're going to create a whole new relationship, one that's based on the present time, on the future, on the reality of the deeper truth of who you are, not your old story. You're not going to be pulling on the story, right? Yeah. So
no, that's good. So that's possible. You end the relationship anyway. I mean, whatever it was needs to end, obviously, and it either ends or it could potentially, rise again, because that happens too. When people finally let go. That's interesting. I like that. So, what was the other thing that you said that you wanted to share?
Well, it has to do with the week 4 of the conscious uncoupling process, which is to teach people communication skills and start to actually give people a way to be able to clear the residue that's in the field. Because that's where people are struggling with. There can be residue in the field for years, for 20 years, for 30 years. I mean, my poor mother has been divorced from her former husband. She's been remarried for 26 years, divorced from her former husband for 30. And there's still all this residue because they have shared family together. Every time they try and connect with each other, there's anger and hostility, and you owe me this, and you owe me. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. It's incomplete.
Right? But this happens. So people who've been, now that's a kind of an unconscious, uncoupling that's pretty across the board unconscious. But, then a lot of us who have been developing ourselves and kind of putting the pieces together on why we are the way we are, and, seeing our issues and being able to articulate them to others. One of the things we're trying to do to clear the field with each other is to explain why we did what we did, or why we are the way we are. well, I hurt you because, my mother hurt me, and,
Right.
so on, and I have low self-esteem, and I can't draw boundaries, and, I can't do this or do that. It's like this whole story. And it helps. It's a little better than the former, but it actually doesn't clear the field, because it leaves the other person with the knowledge that you could certainly do that again, and probably you will do it again. So they can't really trust you. They can't let down their guard. They can't go on and create a free, partnership with you that would reflect where the relationship now needs to evolve, which is to co-parent, just to be good neighbors, or whatever that is, or good friends. So I teach this process around how to uncouple, how to actually clear the residue with someone, which is just in a nutshell, which I can just share with listeners right now, has to do with being able to kind of put your own why you are the way you are, or your own story aside, and really listen with an open heart to the impact that your behavior had on another person. This goes back to this developmental moral development that we're talking about throughout. To really allow that to touch you, and to just know you had a million probably very good reasons why you did what you did, and there'll be a place to talk about that.
Right.
But in this moment, you want to just get the impact, and then you want to recreate that for the other person. I can really see how confused you were, how hurt you were. I can see that cost you blah, 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 that you took action on that you sabotaged, this possible career success, like all of the ripple effect that my acting out in that moment, or my telling a lie, or whatever it was that I did, for all these understandable reasons, actually what it cost that person, what it was like for them.
Well, the influence. I mean, one of the, I'm in the work that I'm doing, I'm teaching people how to have a particular kind of relationship, sort of at that more, like as elevated as you can create. And influence, staying engaged in the real sensitivity of the influence that you're actually having on each other continuously.
Wow.
And trafficking in that, and actually desiring that. So it's like, instead of I'm over here in my universe and you're over there in your universe, that the value, I mean, what makes our relationship precious. So for friendship, in friends, that I'm actually consciously influencing you and allowing you to influence me, and becoming more vulnerable, and knowing exactly that my thoughts even are, if I start having negative thoughts or doubts about our friendship, that actually is contaminating the field that we're trying to be friends in. Yeah, so,
level.
Learning. I mean, it's kind of, I love what you're saying, because it's like the work that you're doing in this is so good, because it's excavating all of the stuff that we do with each other all the way through. And obviously that you can live like your mom. Like, I mean, so many people that end relationships live in this murky, toxic state forever. And then, how do you then start a relationship, with someone who's capable and interested in engaging fully, and learning how to do that dance continuously. So in a way, your relationship's always dissolving and coming to a place of newness. You don't get into some reified role that you're, playing off of, and all the things that you're not telling each other, and all the other nonsense. So I love this. Okay, so what's the last stage? What's number 5?
Okay, and I'm very hungry to learn about what you're doing, because it sounds really, really interesting and fabulous. So the last stage is creating your happily even after life. And that's like the really setting up structures for everyone to thrive. And that's where we start to take the community into account. Well, together or apart, because at this point we're not sure. You can do it together or apart, and hopefully together. But we want to remember that relationships are both private and public. Right? Relationships are also, there's a public aspect to relationship. And so one of the reasons that people are having a hard time parting well is because the people in your world are disoriented. They feel like they have to choose one person over the other. So there's divided loyalties. There's, all sorts of things. Your friends are just automatically coming in. Oh, he was an idiot. He was never worthy of you anyway. They're trying to boost you up, by devaluing that person. They're choosing. So there's this whole way that I have kind of looking at the agreements that you had, not just as a couple on a private level, but what were the agreements that you had as a couple on a public level, and to start to bring the community that like we were the pillars of the community, or the people could always come to us with their problem, or we were the model couple, or all of those things, or our children, whatever our agreements with our children were. So there's this public aspect, and in order to create true wellness around our separations, we need to create cohesion in our community. So there's conscious uncoupling rituals, which I help people to do both on a private level and then kind of conscious uncoupling rituals on a public level. And that can be a formal ritual that people do where everybody gathers and there's an opportunity for people to transition together, and you're kind of telling people what the new expectations are, what the new rules are. You're letting people know it's okay to be kind to both of you and to include both of you, that you're supportive of each other, that you honor each other, that you love each other, that they're free to express love to both of you. So you're creating well-being in the community. And then or you could do it as a less formal ceremony where maybe you have a dinner party to celebrate your divorce or your uncoupling, and you actually make a toast to each other and to the love of that you shared, and a toast to each other's future, and everybody raises their glass and cheers, here, I'll agree to that. So everybody's aligned with the new future, and there's well-being throughout, because everybody grieves when a couple
That is fantastic.
Parts.
I mean, because I wish, where were you? When I got divorced a long time ago, but I was public. I was very well known with Est and, my husband, and we had our, 4-year-old, and I was known, so you have this huge world of people that are reacting, which you had. I mean, you had it probably even in a bigger way. And I love that, how to then be responsible for all of the people that you're influencing, and to be loving and caring and give them a way to find a new place, instead of they're just sort of going crazy, making judgments and having reactions, and you're just getting hit with all that, and then they're not knowing what to do. I mean, that's brilliant. I love that. That is so beautiful.
Well, and that's what it is to be an evolutionary right now, right? Yeah. We're creating new possibilities in culture for how to create a world that's actually harmonious and more kind and more caring. And thank you.
I mean, you're so good. The thing too, Katherine, is having tracked your work, you have this. You're a real teacher. Do you know what I mean? You're an author, but I've listened to you and I've watched you work with people, and you take people from one place and they really arrive someplace else, and you are committed to that, which is what I consider a real you're not just giving out information and coming up with interesting techniques, which is a good thing as well, but you literally put people someplace else so they can then go on in their lives from a new place.
Absolutely.
And I just love that. So almost like whatever you bump into next, you have this ability to come to go, okay, now, this is what it takes to complete something, to use the energy to move forward, to really take into consideration all of the different elements and aspects that really then allow you to stand in a new reality.
Yeah,
and that's just brilliant and beautiful. So,
thank you. What fun this conversation. I love talking to you.
It's wonderful.
I could do it again.
Definitely. So I need to just let everybody know about our next show, but I just thank you.
Oh, and also I'd love to tell people.
Oh, yes. No, tell how they can find you.
Yeah, Art of Conscious Completion, www.artofconsciouscompletion.com is a free 75-minute seminar that people can take. It's going to give them a lot more information. They can kind of go through and really learn even more about the process and how they can begin to use these principles in their own life.
Artofcompletion.com. And if they get lost, artofconsciouscompletion.com. Okay. But if they get it all lost, if they look for Katherine Woodward Thomas, they can find it?
They can find it through Evolving Wisdom, which is
Evolving Wisdom. Okay.
And if they course.
Okay, and they can also just go to our website, and I'll
They
just send
can,
things
yeah.
over.
Okay.
Okay, just in case anybody can't
We're
find it.
working on the book. It'll be easier once the book is out there.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so our next show, which will be February 15th, is called Techno Optimism. Are we turning into gods with Jason Silva, who's this young, I don't know, he's got to be younger than 40. He's amazing. I mean, he's a totally inspired. He calls himself an ecstatic futurist. He's a video maker and self-described philosophical performer. And when you see his videos, he's just like on fire with the possibility of where we're going with technology and how we can create a future that's unprecedented, from a very wild and extreme. It's kind of like he was also called, which I love, he's part Timothy Leary, part Ray Kurzweil, and part Neo from The Matrix, which is about right. So he's pretty wonderful. So that'll be the next conversation. And just one last thing is that the work that Jeff Carrera and I are doing, which is the Evolutionary Collective, which is, I teach a number of different things online, but this is the live coming together with the people, the leaders and the innovators from around the world that want to go to those leading edges of where we can go that's possible, and what kinds of metanorma capabilities can we discover, and how can we create relationship on the highest levels. So we're doing that live next weekend in New York, and people are coming from all over. But if anybody still wants to come, they're more than welcome to join us in New York City. So they just go to evolutionarycollective.com. And I'll also be doing one of these 3 days in Santa Fe, March 9th, 10th, and 11th. And then after that, the spaceship takes off. We start in April with a year-long. And so the people that are committed to doing that will begin in April. So that's it. And thank you again to you. And we'll play the outro music, and have a wonderful day. And have a wonderful Valentine's with your new relationship.
Thank you so much.